This is Faitth Brooks. She is a brilliant mind, really a brilliant mind, and a dear friend of mine and my husband, Anthony. And we've known you for a long time, almost like 8 years now, right?
Yeah,
And
it's been a while.
for those that don't know us, I'm Lindsay Love hyphen Bivens. Me and my husband Anthony Bivens, we pastor Collective San Diego, a church in San Diego, obviously, and um, we really it's a diverse church, and a multi-ethnic church, but also multicultural and multi-generational, and we really are intentional about kind of making space and keeping the culture that way, making space for that to kind of flourish, for different cultures and different backgrounds to thrive in our church community. So we really thought this conversation was important considering what's going on in our country. So Faith, as people are joining, I'm still gonna you can kind of just talk a little bit. I want to ask you about your background and how this passion for racial reconciliation work kind of started. Because when I met you back in Houston, that's our history. We met in Houston. You were in social work and you were a caseworker for foster kids, and you've always been passionate about being an advocate for those that have had their voices suppressed. I hate saying the voiceless because nobody's voiceless, but people have had their voice suppressed. So talk about your background a little bit and your passion towards racial reconciliation and how you got into that.
Yeah, so I think that the really cool thing is that when you're a child, like you really kind of have to pay attention to the things that your children are into, what they
Yep.
love, like the things that kind of make them tick. So for me, my parents were really intentional about like putting us in the community and having us do community work. So I remember being 5 and being at events where we were serving our community and those who were homeless, and I loved it. Like I was on a stool, I could barely see over the table, but like I loved helping and serving people. And my mom would always talk about how I would always find the person that nobody wanted to hang with or be with and hang out with that person. And
Yeah.
so through that and just through growing and learning, I felt this passion for people. I'd always had it. And so when it was time for me to go to college, which I did not plan to go to college, my mom said, maybe you should get your degree in sociology. And the school that I went to was a small private Christian school. They didn't have that degree. So I ended up getting my degree in social work. And it was through those classes that I was listening to everything, learning intently what it meant to be a social worker. And I thought, this is it. Like, this
Yeah.
is my passion. This puts all the years of everything together.
Yeah.
And this is, who I am. And so
Yeah.
I got my bachelor's, and last year or the year before last finished up my master's degree in social work. So that's kind of how I got started in that. And
Yeah.
I would say the racial justice piece kind of started, I would say, like in college, being at a predominantly white school and experiencing a lot of microaggressions and racism. And
Yeah.
I felt like I wanted to start developing language to be able to speak to those situations and what I was experiencing. And so that kind of started the journey for me.
Yeah.
Because before, I just felt like if I'm a good Black person, if I'm fitting in, I'm trying to assimilate all these other things, then I won't be like pigeonholed or, viewed as one of the other Black people, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'll be fine. I'll be safe,
Yeah.
And through attending a small evangelical school, that was very interesting. And I had some very racist experiences there. It showed me that it doesn't matter who you are or what you do or however you make yourself to feel exceptional or acceptable or do whatever you want to do. You can't change the color of your skin, and that alone is an issue for people. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, guys. For those that are kind of just joining, I was asking Faith to just kind of talk about her background a little bit, of how because when I met her, she was a social worker working with foster kids and as a caseworker, and I wanted to know how she kind of got into racial reconciliation. I'm going to also ask you in a second, but as people are joining, I want to let you know, we all know with IG Live, things can go crazy because there's so many people are on the internet. So we do have a backup plan if things go haywire, because this conversation is important enough to have it done well. And so if we start having glitches, blah blah blah, we have a backup plan. But we're gonna just pray that Jesus be a Wi-Fi. That's what we're gonna pray for.
Yes.
We're gonna pray that he be a Wi-Fi. He hold our connection strong. Amen.
Amen.
So Faith, now you are in Atlanta and you are working with an amazing organization, Be the Bridge. Will you please share a little bit about your work with Be the Bridge?
Yeah. So
and what they do.
I got connected with Be the Bridge in 2015 through our founder, Latasha Morrison.
Yeah.
I moved to Austin, took the leap. I just decided to move there in 2 weeks. Felt like that's what God wanted me to do, and work for a case management agency there. And through my time there, I realized that Austin's really white. And where I particularly was living was a very white part of Austin. And I would go like a week without seeing a Black person. And I was like, I made a mistake moving to this place. And so one of my friends said, you need to meet this lady named Latasha Morrison. She's incredible. You're going to love her. And so I met Latasha, and she hadn't even started Be the Bridge as an organization. She just wrote this guide for people to start having these conversations. And this was birthed out of what happened with Michael Brown in Ferguson. Yeah. And she was having conversations with her friends, and she just writes this guide, and a big organization shares it, and it blows up. And she's like, wait, like now this is like a whole thing. And so she just became like a big sister and friend, and I just started volunteering. So that was over 5 years ago, and I volunteered majority of the time. And last year in August of 2019, I moved to Atlanta to be full-time as the director of programs. So who we are as an organization, Be the Bridge, we exist to really inspire people towards racial healing, equity, and reconciliation. And so that means that our organization and our mission and our vision is to partner with organizations and churches and individuals to help cultivate healthy conversations about race and racial reconciliation, and how that can be accomplished in the church and also in organizations really around the world. So that's who we are and what we do.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. Yeah, I like you have a similar experience. So I'm from San Diego, and now we're back in San Diego, but born and raised here. My family is super multicultural. I myself am biracial. I'm Black and Dutch, white, and but all my white family is actually in the Netherlands. Long story, but so I was kind of in a diversity bubble. Like I didn't understand. I guess, yeah, I didn't understand. I always tell people I'm going to just be super unfiltered because we keep it 100 around here, especially at Collective. But I didn't understand my Blackness until I moved to Michigan, Holland, Michigan. And I was the creative arts pastor, worship arts pastor at a church out there. And I love the church, but the area, I didn't realize, oh my gosh, like this is really happening. And so that's when I started to really be intentional about educating my own self on racial inequity and social justice issues. And right when I was out there, that was the time when all of a sudden a lot of the unarmed Black men being shot and women was kind of on the rise. It was while I was out in Holland, Michigan. So I was having to digest all of this while being in a predominantly white area. And so I remember actually calling you when you were in Austin and asking, because you moved to Austin a year after I left Houston to go to Michigan. You moved to Austin. I was like, how are you doing? So yeah, when you get out of being in Houston, it's also a melting pot. You're a little bit more awakened to some things you might not have been in a diverse area. So we're going to dive into our conversation today, and I just want to I just want to kind of lay out some safety rules, right? Because whenever you talk about race and social justice and faith and all that stuff and church, it's super touchy, and people can put their guards up. People feel attacked. People on both sides. And I want to just I want to say that this is the most important thing that everybody knows that's coming in and out of the chat, is that this is a safe space to discuss this. This is a safe place. It's not a hateful place. This is not about bashing the majority culture, white culture. It's not about bashing, white bash party. That's not that. This is not a guilty thing. This is literally to have a dialogue and address some truths, because there are some truths to all this. And so I just want, as everybody's in the comments and people are, two things. One, again, we want to be intentional about this being interactive. So if you have questions, as we're talking and I'm bringing up a point or a discussion prompt, write them in the comments. We're going to be looking, and we'll address what we can, and we'll go from there. But as you're writing in the comments, whether you're like, "Ooh, that was good," or whatever the case is, you can let us know if the conversation is great. Just please be respectful of everybody. I see the people that are joining a super diverse group, and so and let's just be respectful of everybody. And this is all love, and it's just all about addressing a really hard truth, right? So. With that, I want to kind of hit three things with you, Faith, and I am so grateful you're taking the time to do this. I want to hit three things with you, all circling around the response of what had happened this past week, really it happened 2 months ago, back in February 23rd, but the awareness of that has happened in the last couple of weeks. I want to talk about the response specifically to Ahmaud's case, and what about this has encouraged you, and if it does at all, and what maybe has been a little discouraging or eye-opening in the least about Ahmaud's case.
I would say something that has encouraged me is seeing a lot of people speak up. That has been really encouraging. There's also like an asterisk next to that when I say that, because there's a lot more that you could go into about people speaking up. But in the general sense, people speaking up and having a collective outcry of people saying this is not right, this should not have happened, that is encouraging. And that has been, across people of many different ethnicities, colors, and so that's great.
Yeah. I think you kind of hit on it. So the discouraging or the eye-opening part, you kind of said that there's an asterisk. I want to talk about that a little bit, because I know I personally called you and I was like venting in my safe space, because I had to hey, even as a pastor, there's some anger there. I had to kind of center myself and say, okay, God, what are we doing? I remember calling you and talking to you about this particular thing, about Ahmaud's case being the perfect case. And then you've kind of hitting the same thing and wrote a really cool piece I read the other day about it. So will you speak up to that real quick? Why is Ahmaud's case the perfect case for specifically white Christians, white evangelicals, or just white people in general to speak up about? And what is so problematic, or why is that problematic? Because we're kind of feeling the same way there. Why is that problematic?
Yeah, so I think it's the perfect case because this guy is just out jogging. Now, recently, a video was released of him walking into a house that was under construction and just kind of looking around. And still, there's no crime in doing that. Many of us have done it before, so that's not really an issue. But Ahmaud's case was really a perfect case because he's just jogging, right? He's just taking a jog, and yet he is run down and killed, right? And if you know anything about the history of this country and the brutal history of lynchings, which is why we say Ahmaud was lynched, his body might not have been hanging from a tree, but they have documented records, and there's pictures of Black bodies being pulled on with nooses on their necks, dragged with trucks. And this young man was run up on with trucks, and he was brutally killed. This is like an undeniable, wow, like this is happening. And it's 2020 and people can see it, and it's in your face, and it's not in a history book, and it's not in anything else. It's just right there for you to see how evil white supremacy is, how evil that is, right? But then you have other cases like Eric Garner, where he was selling cigarettes on the corner. And people can make excuses for, well, he shouldn't have been selling, loose cigarettes. That's why he died. Or Michael Brown, he had a little tussle with the guy down the street, or he took a drink, or he took something, so he kind of deserved it. You know what I mean? And so the difference is that there's an essence of, if you do something wrong as a Black person, your presumed guilt is almost enough to not say anything because you're presumed guilty simply for the color of your skin. And that is not reason enough to speak out. And I think that's where we get into this little tug of war, right? Because
Right.
it's basically saying, well, the case isn't clean enough. There aren't enough facts. There aren't enough
Right.
things. We have to see what they did wrong to deserve being killed like that.
Right. And that's the problem with the quote unquote wait for the facts culture.
Right.
Because that with, like you said, with Michael Brown, or even just as recent, honestly, we can just talk about right now, Sean Reed,
Yeah.
and Breonna Taylor, and all these things, like
Right.
that there is a silence on it. So Ahmaud had this giant outrage, and then with the other ones that are a little bit more nuanced, there's a silence because let's wait for the facts.
Right.
And you just kind of spoke on why that's so dangerous, because like you said, it's immediately when someone black does something wrong, we're okay with, like, well, they kind of deserved it. They shouldn't have fought. They shouldn't have done this. And I remember right after Michael Brown, literally months after Michael Brown, you and I just talked about that. I think Ryan Lochte, the U.S.
Yeah.
Olympic swimmer, he was in Brazil for the Olympics and had kind of a tussle in a gas station, kind of a very similar situation with as Michael Brown. And he was arrested, and everyone. I'm saying there were a lot of people that were ashamed of his actions and were like, "Oh man, he shouldn't have done that." But there was a lot of people that kind of, I remember feeling, "What is happening?" Because people were saying, like, "Well, boys will be boys. You know, it was just a mistake. He was drunk. All these different things. He punched the gas attendee or whatever, and thought boys will be boys." And I'm like, he's 30. Michael Brown was
Right.
18. Like, where is the difference there? So thanks for touching on that. You've talked a lot in your conversations about the importance of white allies.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you take a moment and talk about that right now? Just the importance of white allies. What is that? For some that might think, what is that? That's a trigger word or whatever, but can you talk about that?
Yeah, I like to say co-conspirators because I want you in the game with me. A co-conspirator is, next to me, even willing to jump in front of me, even willing to take, a bullet for me if necessary. I want somebody who is equally engaged and wanting to join the fight for justice as I am, and willing to elevate my voice to speak,
Yeah.
right? To speak for myself, but is willing to say, hey, look, we need to call this out. We need to be honest about what's happening here. And so I think that it's important because, we've had a lot of silence by a lot of our white brothers and sisters, specifically in the church. And I want to speak to that because I do not think that a lot of white people in the church understand the depth of pain and grief many people of color are experiencing right now, that have grown up in churches, specifically predominantly white churches, and they've been met with silence.
Yeah.
And I think that has felt so deep for us because in our minds, these people you spend years with in the trenches, years within small groups, years with doing life with them at their homes and eating. And then something like this happens and it's silence. It feels almost like, oh, so you don't care about me. Because that could happen to me. That could be my brother. You know what I mean? I saw Michael Brown and I saw my brother. He's a big guy. You know what I mean? And so I think that there's a disconnect on how their silence can feel to us as people of color. And we as people of color have to unite together and all be speaking up, right? There's been a lot of anti-Asian racism going on right now.
Yeah, you've been speaking about that.
We have to speak up about that too. As Black people, we have to make sure that we are all engaging in this with each other. And I think that the collective use of our voices, specifically calling on our white brothers and sisters to say this is wrong, is important because I like to say when you change the mind of a mother, of somebody who has children, you can change the legacy of a family. You can change the legacy by saying, hey, you know what? We are not going to engage in racist behavior. We are not going to uphold that in our home anymore. And it's not enough to tell your kids that, oh, we don't see color. We love everybody. That doesn't help.
Yeah.
because we all have different colors, and that's okay. There's beauty in it. Teach your
Yeah.
children the beauty in it, the
Yeah.
celebratoriness of being around people who are different. And it's in the collection of that, those voices, those things, that
Yeah.
we can start to see the beauty. So we want our white brothers and sisters to speak up, because that's how it should be. We are all made in the image of God. And if you believe that we are image bearers, speak up and use your voice.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to see. So I just think that that's like, really important for us to do.
Yeah. You just like kind of totally segued this right into the next situation. So obviously we're church. So I think it's important. You and I had some offline conversations about the church's response and the church's need to kind of start being in the front of these things.
Yeah.
So I'm almost done with the book, and I know you've read it because you literally just mentioned it. But The Color of Compromise is an amazing book. You got it? Oh, come
Yes.
on! I'm not a copy, so I can't flex on you. But but yes, it's an amazing book, and Jamar Tisby. I love that he opens up, right? He opens up the book talking about the 4 girls who died in the 16th Street Baptist Church,
Right.
and he talks about a white lawyer named Charles Morgan Jr. How he got up in front of all white businesses at a business club, and he gave an address in which he was asked who was responsible for throwing that bomb, and his answer to that question was, "We all did it." And he went on to explain that every time the white community, especially Christians, right, fail to confront racism in its everyday mundane forms, they created a context of compromise that allowed for an extreme act of racial terror, like planting that dynamite at the church. So that's the idea of complicity, right? That it's not that every Christian was hurling racist comments or they're super racist or whatever the case is, but the silence, that makes them complicit. So with saying that, and that's the larger conversation, how can the church be a part of the solution, maybe instead of reacting to tragedies, which is what we're really, really good at. So instead of reacting, how can we start to become more proactive in this? And again, before you answer that, guys, if you're in the comments, keep commenting. I see them. I'm loving it. And also, if you feel like you need to ask a question about something that we hit, go ahead and throw it in there and we will get to it. But yeah, so how can the church be a part of the solution and not be reactionary, but proactive?
Right. I think that the church can be a part of the solution by choosing to educate and speak up and make a stance from your church that this is not who we are. These are not ideologies that we're going to uphold in our church, which also means that you run the risk of having to speak up and getting some hate mail from people, or people saying we don't need to talk about this. You're getting too political. I don't want to dive into all of this. You might lose some tithe, things like that. And so I think you have to be willing to lose something to really gain and walk in the truth of what God believes and thinks about his people. I mean, if you truly believe that we are made in the image of God, you truly believe that God's plan for people and his desire for people is to walk in wholeness and fullness and to be seen fully, then you cannot uphold these racist ideals. Yesterday I posted, the scripture in 1 John 4:20, how can you say that you love God and then you hate your brother? How? Like, how can you hate your brother whom you've seen and love a God that you have not seen? And so I think that it is, really important for us to start observing our hearts and for the church to ask a really crucial question. Are we serving God, or are we serving patriotism? Like, who are we serving here? And are we willing to truly walk in the fullness of what God has called us to do and do the hard work of speaking up? I mean, it's not easy work,
No.
and that's what we do with Be the Bridge. We talk with a lot of churches. We have our Be the Bridge guides, and we encourage churches to use our curriculum to start conversations with people. There's no need to feel overcome and feel like, oh, we don't know where to start. I'm telling you, we have a roadmap for you. We have a roadmap to help you start these conversations in your church in a healthy manner, for people to grow, for people to walk in the fullness of God and really see that, man, maybe I have some blind spots, but I can truly trust in God's word for me and for the people that I'm around to advocate and to speak up and to not be silent because
Yeah.
it's convenient.
Yeah. How important is it for the church to speak up from the platform and not just, I don't think that there's a lot of things that we say, what, these are more in relationship conversations, but speak up specifically from the platform about this, and not so much like Ahmad's case, right? Because we said it was easy, but
Right.
the more iffy ones, like there was
Yeah.
radio silence on like Mike Brown in certain
Right.
churches. I know even in my church, like there's at the time where I was at, radio silence. And so how important is on where there's a little nuance, that they're not as clean cut, but yet we know like there's still like it's still wrong. Speak up.
Right. I think that it's important for us to speak up, even if let's say the person is committing a crime. Let's just call it what it is. People have excuses for why it's okay that a person died because they committed a crime. And so I think that it's really important for us to be able to acknowledge the fact that, hey, we don't get to be judge and jury on people. We don't get to say like, okay, well, I think they robbed a store, so they deserve to die. That's not the case. And so I think the thing that many people miss in the advocacy that many people of color are doing right now is all we're saying is our outcry is because they died before even getting due process. They didn't even make it to court. We just want our people to make it to court before being executed. So then it can be decided what needs to happen to them. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that, it's not that people are excusing something that has happened, but it's just that we're saying we want people to get to court. We want them to have the same shot at justice as anyone else. That's all we're saying.
Sure. You see that question that came through?
Yes.
Yeah.
Those are churches that not really okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that when it, in relation to that, churches, I think there's a lot of churches that are speaking out about this. People that are speaking out about this in Black churches. There's been some other faith leaders, that have spoken out about this. Yeah. But I think the main thing what you're talking about when churches aren't rooted in a privilege and oppression. I mean, there's a lot of churches that are rooted in that. I do think that churches can be unrooted from it. And I think that it's important for us to really be able to see and hold those people accountable and call them to speak up, even when it's not convenient. Oh, 2 questions.
Yeah.
What do you say to people who think, what can the church do to dismantle? Yeah, I think one of the main things, I'm going to answer the second one first. One of the main things that the church can do to dismantle white supremacy is to choose to educate themselves on it, which is why I mentioned our Be the Bridge discussion guide, because it kind of walks you through steps, right? Talking about lament, talking about repentance, and really walking you through a biblical foundation on how you can grow and kind of process what's going on in our country and what has been going on racially and why it is important for us to speak up and to speak out. And I think that these are discussions that people have in small groups that have been really healthy. And I think it has to start there. It has to start in education. I say this all the time to anyone. It doesn't matter what color you are. You have to get educated. And so when people say, well, I spoke up, but now what? Well, now what is educating yourself? So for the church leaders need to get educated. Church leaders need to read books. Church leaders need to read this book and many other books that are going to tell you about what the history is, so you know the context of what you're dealing with. And so that way the people of color in your church don't feel like they have to prove to you that racism is real and that they have experienced oppressive things. Because what happens is you end up having to prove it. Like, prove something racist has happened to you. Prove it. Prove it. And that is oppressive for people in those situations. So definitely the church next step is education and healthy discussions about race. And what would you say to people that think churches shouldn't be political at all? I'm going to read something from Will Gravely, who's an amazing pastor of a local church in the Atlanta area. And he said, speaking on race and racism is not divisive. Believing in or silently benefiting from perceived racial supremacy is. We
Mm.
cannot change it if we don't name it. So it's saying that it's political is just like a talking point. We're talking about people. Politics are about people. And we have to acknowledge that this country, unfortunately, has a long-standing history of oppression that has occurred within the African American community and then also the Native American community who've been forced off their land, complete genocide, and with the African American community building this country off of their backs. And this isn't about politics. This is about a long-standing history of oppression that became politics when the way to cover up and to continue oppressing people became about entering into systemic racism, right? Which means that the policies and laws and things that rule and govern us as people were made to put a disadvantage on people of color, specifically Black people. Think about housing, loans, educational systems. Yeah, exactly. Redlining. All of those things go into how systems and communities have been impacted. And that is why when it says it becomes political, it becomes political because our laws are made to disadvantage people of color, and you can't get away from that. I mean, the history is there. The people who've written laws have confessed to it and said, yeah, that was the reason why we did what we did. And so that's why we have to be active and speak up.
Yeah, man, that's so good. You kind of hit on, what is the most important things that churches can do. Well, maybe you didn't. What is the most important thing that a church can do to combat racism right now?
The church needs to repent, and the church needs to educate themselves. There needs to be it's not just an outcry of sadness about what happened to Ahmaud or anybody else who has died unjustly. There needs to be an outcry of true repentance. An outcry of grief. This nation hasn't repented for the sin of racism, for what has happened to Black people for centuries, through lynchings, through beatings, death, rape, all of these things, selling family members, people being torn apart, land. I mean, Black Wall Street, where a whole thriving community of Black people was completely decimated in one day. I mean, we really have to have the church have a heart to repent because the church has been silent, complicit, and also a part of orchestrating these unfortunate biases and policies that have occurred. And that's something that we have to address.
This is a good question right here. Rachel, come on with it.
Yeah. How do we get others to show up for us like we do for others? Is this even our responsibility? Yeah, so I'm going to say this. I think that if you're talking about in context of the people of color, that's like a sub conversation, I feel like. And then if you're talking about, others to show up for us in terms of white people, I mean, all we can do is encourage people to speak out and speak up. But I think that there is a special resilience and tenacity amongst the Black community to fight and fight and fight and fight. I feel like it's just in us to want to speak up and to show up when these things happen. And more and more people aren't accepting the status quo, if you will. We're not accepting silence anymore. But I also think that God has given certain people to have a special grace to speak up and to speak out and continue to endure in this work. It is heavy, exhausting, and tiring work. And I don't think that it is our responsibility to have to educate, to have to teach anybody anything, to have to explain to people our situation and our circumstance, to have to do anything. To be honest, we don't have to bear the burden of this responsibility of education. We don't have to bear the burden of this, let's speak out again, let's do this again, let's convince y'all again, like to support us. That doesn't have to be the burden that's on our shoulders. And I think that I like to encourage, Black people specifically to, hey, have self-care. figure out what works for you. Figure out what that looks like for you. It might not be something to where you can be educating your coworker who's hitting you up and asking you a million questions and wants you to teach them all these things. You need to reference people out, reference them to books, reference them to resources. Like,
Sure,
you got to send
sure,
them somewhere. You know what I
sure.
mean? Like, I have a little mug that says, you can basically like ask me a question once that invoice is paid. Like, I'm not here to just be the like, yeah, like, just let me ask you every single question I ever wanted to know and not read and just
Yeah,
and use your emotional labor for my benefit.
yeah,
There's something called Google,
yeah,
and so I think that we have to get people to a place of willingness to want to learn. And so um, I think that that's something we have to deal with.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What will it take to uproot all that was created to suppress? How do we attain that liberation? I mean, I'm going to be honest. I really think that to me, collective repentance and acknowledgement of what has been done and that it's wrong and that it's evil needs to happen. That will lead us towards liberation. But we are in a broken and sinful world, and let's just be
Yeah.
honest. As long as we live in a broken and sinful world, we're going to deal with broken and sinful people who do believe that there is a superior race and that other people are inferior because of the color of their skin. So we might never be fully on the other side of this, but I can tell you we can fight with a tenacity, and especially the church, we can fight
Yeah.
with a tenacity to be ahead of this, to be the leader in this, to be the speaker in this, and to say that this does not reflect the heart of Jesus. And because we know that, we will not let up and we will not shut up until we see God's true kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And that
Yeah.
is what we need to, I think, carry forward with.
Yeah, you talked about like just the really the history of our country. We haven't truly addressed it or repented. It's like we tried to sweep it under the rug. And just like a person that won't address their own pain, their own hurt,
Right.
like it never goes away. Like
Right.
you always until you really address it, even your own stuff in your own life, it's always going to be this open wound. And putting a Band-Aid
Right.
over it, you're just going to have to keep changing the Band-Aid because you keep bleeding. And that's kind of what we see with our country. We've never really kind of went into surgery, had it all repaired, fixed it up, addressed it, all that. So we're just bleeding through new bandages every other couple days, and
Exactly.
we're not addressing the real pain and the hurt. And I mean, just even from slavery going right into Jim Crow laws, almost pretty much,
Yes. Yes.
which was really what Jim Crow laws. I think most of us on here know what they are, but they're really laws that were in place to keep Black people as second-class citizens.
Right.
Different fountains, all these different things, different doctors, different churches, different schools, all these things that really kind of continued to keep second class citizens, Black people underneath
Right.
the majority. And so there was healing that needed to happen. There's the healing that still needs to be happening from there.
Right.
Still needs to
Yeah.
happen from this, and so with that, I remember Martin Luther King Jr. He once said, right, when it comes to justice issues, you were talking about the churches need to lead out here. He said often the church is often the tail light rather than the headlight in society,
Mm-hmm.
right? Kind of getting at, I feel like, we've talked about this, and I think most people on here will get it, is that the church has kind of been tone deaf
Right.
to a lot of these issues. And we always, even in the civil rights movement, the church wasn't leading out. They weren't speaking out. They only kind of made changes when the legislation was created. And then the churches kind of jumped on board. So, that's just kind of our history in the church's
Right.
history in America, and just even with racial reconciliation and racial equality, that we've always been behind the curve. We're not the headlight. We're not leading the way and saying this is wrong, this is a sin, this is evil. So with the church having that tendency to be tone deaf on these issues, if that inaction continues, what threat does that pose the church, you think, right now? As people are getting more, that this is the trigger word, but more woke. As people are kind of going, no, this is not okay. What threat does that pose the church, you think?
The church is starting to lose its credibility. I think the church, the more the church is complicit in times like this, the church starts to lose its credibility with people. I've seen it, happen even with people of color in deep grief and disbelief that churches they've been a part of 15, 10, 20 years, however long, have stood in silence. And it has caused many to leave the church. And so we have to ask a broader question, where are we headed as a church? Who are we serving truly? If we say we love people, what does that look like? And I'm not just talking about a missions trip. You know what I'm saying? It's easy for people to go on a missions trip overseas and to see some Black people over there and be like, oh, they're so precious, they're so cool. We're here in America. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're here in America and people don't care. And that's a problem. And so I think that, I think that we have to talk about that. I'm going to look at that question, Monica, but there's something that Jamar Tisby says in his book that I think is really important. So y'all need to get this book. But he says,
seriously,
when it comes to racism, the American church does not have a how-to problem, but a want-to problem. Given 10 minutes, a pen and a paper, most American Christians can come up with a list of ways to increase racial equity in our congregations and community. We know that we need a more diverse leadership and that we should develop relationships across racial and ethnic lines. The people who continue to peddle prejudice should be opposed. Though solutions abound, racism remains. And so I think that, we have to address that. And so this question, how do we encourage majority culture to embrace these issues and conversations? So I'm going to say this, majority culture churches and pastors need to follow leaders of color actually doing this work. You need to follow people like my boss, Latasha Morrison, who's leading the work of Be the Bridge. You have so many other pastors. There's also some people like Jamar Tisby. You can follow Lisa Sharon Harper, who's doing amazing work that you can follow. Brenda Salter McNeil. She has been a trailblazer for justice for many years now. Austin Channing. I could list several leaders for, a while now. Kathy King, So Chang Ra, Eugene Cho. There's a lot of people leading and speaking in this work, a lot of people of color, a lot of believers, a lot of people to follow who are actually carrying the torch for this. We need our white brothers and sisters to speak up and come alongside, but not exercise trying to take over. We don't want you to take over. We want you to listen. We want you to speak to your people, encourage people to educate. But this is a conversation that people of color are actually leading in. There's no need to recreate resources that are already out there, that are ready and available for you to use and for you to give to your congregation. It's something that we need people to be okay following the leadership of people of color doing this work. And I think that that's something that we need to see happen more often. This isn't a new conversation to us. This isn't something we're just kind of muddling around and trying to figure out. We've been doing this. And so trust our leadership. Speak up, but send your people to us. Help us to love your people and steward your people well and encourage you all. But there's no need to reinvent the wheel because there are, I'm telling you, tons of leaders already doing this work gladly, who have done a lot of research, very versed in this, and that are really ready and willing to start helping you have these conversations.
Yeah. So I have this kind of, I subconsciously was like, okay, we'll go to 1 o'clock. And so if it goes longer, it's fine. But 1 o'clock was kind of the thing.
Yeah.
So I want to segue into kind of where you're at right now, personal responsibility. Yeah. So in my years of starting to really dive into educating myself on racial reconciliation and the racial equity and all these things like that, I think I've had I've come to learn, and again, we talked about this a little bit offline, 4 truths for me. One, just because, truth number one, just because you're Black doesn't make you an expert on racial reconciliation. Right. You have experiences, but it doesn't. So I'll ask you in a second to maybe you can just do it right now because we're in the middle of it. I don't want to get too far ahead. How important is it for Black people to invest in educating themselves on this work as well? Because we're trying to reconcile.
It's really important. It's,
Yeah,
you know, it's crucial. It's just as crucial for Black people as it is white people. The only difference is that you have the lived experience, right? But I've
yeah,
met a lot of Black people who are ignorant of things but have lived experience. And so
yeah,
you end up doing a harm to the movement, more harm than good when you talk out of ignorance and you're not really educated on the issues, and then you
yeah,
start sharing about it, and then it kind of like it ends up going left. You know, you're like, oh wait, that's not right. You know, so it's
yeah,
important, you know, for us to read. It's important for really any person of color, anybody. That's why I say everyone needs to get educated. It's not just white people. Everybody has to get educated, right? But not everybody is called to speak on and educate others, right? That
yeah,
everybody has different callings in life. And so some people are, you know, can do this and have the voice and mantle to be able to carry this message forward and have the
yeah,
endurance to do it. Some people just need to be educated and know so they can be beneficial to their community and to be able to speak up at the PTA meetings when people are trying to do some crazy stuff at your kid's school. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
education is valuable for all of us. And I think that we all have a part to play. This is when it comes to the individual. Like, what's my part to play? Well,
yeah,
when you get educated, when you read books, when you know, like I have this book here, you know, when you read books like Color of the Law, talking about redlining and why we have communities the way that they are today, then you go to your school board meetings. You see what they're doing to schools in your community that are maybe marginalized, that are maybe, you know, don't have enough books, teachers, resources, and you start to speak up and you say, you know what, this isn't right.
yeah,
You start to vote differently. You
yeah,
know, you start to say, hey, you know, I wasn't even paying attention to my school board voting, but I need to. I need to
yeah,
see what's been happening. You know, you start to, you know, ask yourself questions. Does everybody in my community look like me?
yep,
Do I know anybody else that doesn't look like me? And I
yeah,
tell people, this is how you know who your real friends are. They're the people that are either in the camera roll on your phone because you've seen them.
yep,
They're on your Instagram wall somewhere. Like you know who your community is.
yep,
And to say, oh yeah, I have a friend, she's Black, da, 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 but you know she's an associate, that doesn't cut it. You really need to evaluate your life. Do an audit. Do a little diversity audit in yourself.
yeah,
What books am I reading? How many books on my shelf are from people of color? How many, you know, like, is it all just the same voice, same context? You know, who am I getting spiritual direction from? Are any of
yeah,
them people of color? You
that's good.
know, ask yourself, you know, who am I looking at and listening to? And this will help you, even if you're in an area where it's predominantly white and you're like, I mean, I still don't have a lot of people around me. What do I do? Change who you listen to, change who
Change
you
your,
follow on social media,
yeah,
make that more diverse, change who you're reading,
yep,
change those
yep,
things because it'll start to change your mind and
yep,
impact how you respond to people. And
yeah,
so I just think that it's really important for us to speak up and to say, hey, I have a personal responsibility, whether I'm in a diverse community or not, to switch up some things in my life,
yeah,
to change the way that I think. So that way, when I walk into a room and I see that, man, there's only one or two people of color in here, or these kids, how am I seeking that the curriculum is, you know, is working well for these students? What are my kids learning in school? What's the
right,
history curriculum? You know, like, start asking those
yeah,
questions.
yeah. You want to answer Quabi's question, Quab?
Oh yes. um
Yeah,
I missed all these. It was stuck. Can I email a list? Yeah, I have a list that we have on Goodreads for Be the Bridge, and I can send that to Lindsay.
yeah. I think I
What
saw it in the West.
gaps do you see in the Black community that are going to strengthen our efforts to cause change? Yeah, so I think in the Black community, you know, there's a lot of lament going on right now in the Black community. So there's layers to, I think, what people are feeling. You know, there's that righteous anger many people are dealing with, which rightfully so. And I think that, you know, I see the Black community in terms of gaps. I mean, we've just got to stay united. I'm just going to say it that way. You know, we can talk about this a myriad of different ways, but we cannot be mad. We cannot be getting mad and upset with each other when Black people are trying to talk to white people, trying to help. We can't be mad that some people have that gift and want to talk to white people and want to help them, probably understand and dissect some of these conversations. We can't be mad at somebody if they feel like they don't want to talk to anybody, about it or educate them at all. We just have to say that we are in this together. And some of y'all might be able to go out there and talk, and that's great. And I support you. God bless you as you go. And some people might say, that's just not for me. But we have to remain united in the fact that we're going to get this work done. That's the same thing how it was with Malcolm X and the work that he was doing, and then you have MLK doing his work, and they didn't always agree, they didn't always see eye to eye, but they were doing the work. We have to keep that same energy. We don't have to do it the same way. We don't have to address things the same way. There's some people that are a 101 level, 201, 301, 401. We've got to let people come at this the way that they're coming at it. And you can follow whoever you feel like you resonate with. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that that's something for us as a community, is just to remain united. We don't have time to be criticizing and tearing each other down. We need our unity right now more than ever.
Yeah. That's so good. I love that you're saying that not everybody's called to go out and start speaking on it and maybe teaching or equipping people, but everybody has the responsibility, especially as a Christian. Everybody has the responsibility to educate themselves and learn about it and also be an advocate. Be an advocate. So, but you might not be gifted to go equip, but you should be an advocate. Truth number one was, just because you're Black doesn't make you an expert on racial reconciliation. The other thing about that, truth number two, when it comes for Black people, I think is we all have an experience. And I think sometimes because you are Black, even me being biracial, we have experiences that sometimes I think can be devalued in society, because it's like, well, is Michael Brown your family, or is modding your family? Has anybody, I've had this question specifically even when I was living in Holland, Michigan, but like, have you ever experienced it? They want to know, right? They would have, well, when have you seen, kind of like you saying, question about where have you seen the injustice? And of course we have stories. I have stories of myself. I have stories of my husband, Anthony. Like we have these stories. And so how important it is, I guess maybe you might have answered this with Rachel's question, but how important is it for us to share our own experiences, or just maybe speak to the value of our own experiences when it comes to our circles and being able to share that?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to share experiences, to be honest. I think that in order to save face or not be bothered, or we've just tried to not make a big deal of things, I think we haven't said enough. Which is why, I had somebody say like a racist comment to me, a racist troll. I wasn't like crying over it or anything, but I posted it because I wanted people to see that this is not over. It's still happening, And so I think that people need to see it, and we need to be okay talking about it.
So true.
We need to be okay saying, this is what's happening to me. This is what I'm experiencing. As a Black woman, why do I have to, decide or pick a time to have a different hairstyle at work, because I don't want to have to explain it to everybody when my hair goes from braids to natural. Like you got, it's just like all the loops and hoops that you have to go through, as a person of color to kind of, pacify people. It's a lot. And so I think that we have to share our stories honestly. And I think for me, growing up in majority white culture, I held back a lot. I tried to fit in a lot. And when I started to speak up, people were like, well, why are you so mad? Why are you upset? Or like, what happened? It's like, I was silent. And I did you a disservice, because you didn't understand what was happening to me. You didn't understand my lived experience. And so now when I'm speaking out, you're like, man, like, what's going on with you? Well, what's going on is that racism is still prevalent. I'm still living this life. I'm still waking up a Black woman. I'm still fighting this oppression. And I'm tired, and I don't have the ability to be silent anymore, because it's not benefiting anyone, and nothing's changing.
That's good. So truth number three for personal responsibility. I think it's important to say, and I'll just do truth number 3 and truth number 4 together. Just because you're white, it does not make you a racist. And I think
Mm-hmm.
immediately when things like this happen, um, you know, like our white brothers and sisters, and again, like I've had conversations with my own family who's not in America, but just about this issue.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of a wall that goes up
Yeah,
to some.
of
They
course.
get defensive, and I know there's books about white guilt, and you've had conversations about white guilt. So just because you're white, you're not a racist. You need to know that, and it's not your fault. The history of the country, you weren't one of those back in the slavery days. But truth number 4, because you're white, you have privilege,
Mm-hmm.
and that word has become such a trigger word, and it either will propel a conversation, an elevated conversation, or immediately you'll see, people fly out the door because they're
Yeah.
like, what
Yeah.
privilege? I've worked for everything I've had. And the truth
Yeah.
is like,
Yeah.
no, we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
As we're kind of winding down, it's almost 1 o'clock. I know that I just opened up a mouthful, but and it's fine.
At the
But
end.
will you talk about that perspective, like how what I just said?
Yeah, I mean, white guilt and white fragility is real, right?
Yeah.
So there's layers to this. There's a part of white fragility that's kind of like, I feel bad about being white, or I feel bad that I'm being linked to or associated with this, kind of behavior that doesn't represent who I am. That then puts people of color in the position to try to pacify what you're feeling, which isn't healthy. But one thing that white people need to know and understand and truly hear from people of color is people of color are calling out the collective. When we're talking about white people, we're also talking about the system of whiteness, the system of oppression that we exist under. And while, many people of today weren't the people who were slave masters and all of those things, right. There's still the silence and the lack of speaking up and the going with the way things have still contributed to the oppression of people of color. And so there is a responsibility there. And it doesn't, and the weight of that responsibility and the weight of that knowledge isn't for people to walk in shame. It isn't for people to be like, well, I'm upset about being white or I hate being white. No, love who you are. Love who your heritage is. I also want to call out to you that find your ethnic heritage, because the reason why many people became white is because the racist system in our society created to make people feel superior over others was created. But I'm sure you have Italian heritage. I'm sure you have Dutch heritage. I'm sure you have German heritage. Find out who you are. What's your ethnic, DNA and ancestry? Reconnect with that part of yourself. You know what I'm saying? And really start exploring your identity, because in America, many of us are stripped of our ethnic heritage and identities to fit into this unfortunate racialized society. And because we exist under it, we have to deal with it and combat it. Yes.
So I want you to finish that, and we're going to hop right back on. I have 7 seconds. It's going to kick me off live. Apparently, there's a time limit. We're going to hop right back on if that happens, because I want you to. Well, that was weird. Who would have thought there was a time limit for live? That was weird. We are in the middle of this, having a good conversation. And let's see. There's Faith. Come on. You were dropping some wisdom. Hey, everybody. Hold on. We're going to finish this up. Instagram live at the time limit?
Who would have known?
Well, hey, I had personally set an hour for this, but I was like, you were getting at something so good, and I think there's a healing portion to what you're about to say. I was like, no, 30. I was watching the clock go down. I was like, no.
Yes.
But,
yes. Well, I mean, I wanted to say, that healing message to white people. And
yes.
And what I, have said to some of my friends
Yeah.
who have been a part of my Be the Bridge group that are white, one thing where I was going with that with the ethnic heritages, it's important
Yeah.
to reach back to that place, right? To connect to your ethnic heritage and your
Yeah.
ethnic identity. I think that it's really key, and it's something that a lot of Black people can't do, and can't find the roots and the origins. And so if you can do that, I think that will help you as you're journeying through this. You need to know that God made you who you are for a reason. Whatever color you are, God made you that color for a reason. And us talking about this work and the responsibility of our white brothers and sisters to speak up isn't to shame or embarrass or say, man, y'all are awful. That's not the case. We are calling for accountability and solidarity, and for our friends to speak up. And so I think that is very, very important. And it's also important for our white brothers and sisters to know that we love them. I often said this to some friends when I was a kid, like, we're more apt to be open to a white person and to be their friend than they are to us. That was the same in my childhood as it is today. And so it's really important for us to have these conversations, to call our white brothers and sisters into accountability, but to let them know, look, we love you. We need your voice. Hey, Jenna, absolutely. My roommate from college just joined.
Hey, girl.
To know that their voices in speaking up it's important. It's important to say something. Important. And so I think that it's when we're talking about this, when we're saying white people, y'all need to do something, white people speak up, white people read, it can feel like you're like, dang, I'm tired. I don't know, y'all all mad at me. That's not what it is.
You're so angry.
But what we're saying is for too long we have allowed people to be comfortable. And it's time, and I like to say it this way, I'm uncomfortable, and so it's okay if you're uncomfortable. It's okay if you are uncomfortable, because I am too. And if you want to bear the burdens with your brother and sister, especially if you're a believer, your brother and sister in Christ, you have to lean into this conversation. It's uncomfortable. I'm telling you, white friends, I know that some of y'all are like, I don't know, this is too much. And it's easier to turn away and not say anything and to act like it's not happening than it is to lean into the pain and the discomfort and the cries of people from a depth of generational trauma and pain. I know that it is not easy, but at the same time, your willingness to lean in, your willingness to speak out and to speak up, I'm telling you, it will change your life. I have so many friends who have leaned into this work, who have committed to it, committed to learning, and it has changed not only their life, but their family's life, brought more unity, more compassion, more like just a life of fullness, not only in themselves, but in God and in community and people they never would have known hadn't they decided to lean in and to speak up. There's a richness for you on the other side of this ignorance and not knowing things, right? So just choose to lean in and hear this in love. And this is just a call to accountability. And I think that this is something that's healthy for all of us.
That is so good. Well, girl, I love you, and you are the real deal, guys. Faith is the real deal. And she is committed to this work. She's committed to equipping people for this work. She is one of those gifted at teaching, obviously. I forgot to ask one question when it came to the church, because someone brought it up, and I don't want to, if it's going to take too long, I don't know, we'll part two this one of these days, but the multicultural churches became this hot trendy thing for a while.
Yeah.
But what we really saw, we're going to part two this. Yeah, we're going to
I was going to say, I
think we're part two in it. You already know where I'm going.
I already know you're going to ask.
We're part two. But that's what you guys can think about it if we do part two this. I think what we're seeing with the churches is multicultural is really multi-ethnic and and it's not truly multicultural. That's a little teaser, because we will part two this. If you want us to part two it, go ahead and just drop an emoji in the comments. Thank you, Monica. That I'm going to take that as a part two. It's necessary, guys.
An emoji, hearts.
Hearts, to truly begin healing from this,
Yeah.
to truly begin, I guess, the work of reconciling, we have to talk. And we have to educate, like you were saying. We have to talk about it, and we have to get uncomfortable, and we have to be okay with being uncomfortable, because pain really hurts. Like the things that have happened, the ugliness of our history, the ugliness of the things that are happening in our country right now, they hurt, but they have to be talked about. Surgery and recovery hurt,
right? Right.
But putting the Band-Aid on an giant open wound, that hurts too, and it's nasty and it's messy, because now
it's infected.
It's exactly. So I want to thank you so much for taking a good block out of your day and really just being with us and all the people that are online, for you guys to hang with us for a whole hour just because you're home. I'm not assuming you're not busy. People are working from home, all this stuff. For you to commit to taking time to listen to this conversation, ask questions, this is super beautiful. This is part of the healing. Faith, for those that are still hanging around, how can we get more information on how to get involved with Be the Bridge?
Yeah, so you can visit bethebridge.com.
Yeah.
You can also go to our Instagram at @BABridgeBuilder.
Yep.
When you go to our Instagram, there's links there. There's links for you to join our private Facebook group. If you go to bethebridge.com,